Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Very, very good. Yourself?
I don't know. It's that time of year where I just get to do all my adult life admin, and I'm just starting to see how more and more things are getting on my plate and not as much coming in. So, yeah, adulting is quite expensive.
So that's on your mind, huh? The cost of, well, I don't want to call it it's not just the cost of living. I think it's like the cost of adulthood.
Yes, basically that, yeah.
The cost of adulting. The things we probably weren't told when we were at school about the realities of being an adult and being responsible. But yeah, let's get into it. So, life's expensive.
It is, and it's just, I know we obviously weren't told a lot of this at school, and I wonder if it's because you're trying to just prepare students and young people for the world of work, but not so much life itself. So all these things that you have to constantly be paying for before you even left the house, when really would have been the right time to prepare young people for the fact that for most people, most of their time will be spent just trying to cover the minimums before you've even stepped out the house and thought about what you want to do to live, not just for survival. Those essentials like your mortgage and your rent, your council tax, your car, all the things under the sun, TV license, all the things under the sun, right? And you haven't even stepped out of the house yet to think about, oh, you want to go and do indoor skydiving, or you want to go on a road trip for the weekend, or whatever it is, or a holiday abroad. You haven't even started to
Mm.
think about those things. Also, planning for the future. I see so many articles and vlogs online by various finance professionals advising people about how they should be saving and investing. Do you do pensions? Do you do an ISA? Do you get stocks and shares investment account? All these different options that are available to you, but you have to have disposable income to be able to do that. And if you suppose the advice is do what you love and then it doesn't feel like work, a lot of the things people love doing don't necessarily have a commercial outcome associated with it, right? Or a high commercial outcome associated with it. So you may well be in
Mm.
something that you really enjoy, but if you haven't thought about how you can turn that into revenue, you could find yourself stuck, right? And then you don't have as much disposable income that then enables you to do other things with your life outside of work. And I call it adulting, and I find oftentimes in text exchanges with friends catching up, the adulting word pops up more and more, and we're all saying to each other, this we feel like we've been missold. And what does the end of this look like, or what's the light at the end of the
I guess like generationally, we we have our standard of living has improved, but with that has come like a whole load of additional costs that say our parents' generation didn't have to face in their 20s and 30s. One being if you went to university, you didn't have to pay for it. And I think that's like one big overhead cost for a lot of young people. I'm old enough just to have escaped the premium element of tertiary education, but like the way that we live, you know, having running cars, sort of, I guess, the cost and access to food, eating out, subscriptions, the endless
Mm.
cost of, it's not just a TV license anymore. It's, you've got to have your Netflix, you've got Disney, you've got Prime, HBO, and all of that, like those elements. And I guess also our standard or our expectation of like you want to be able to go on holiday at least once a year. You want to be able to dine out, and those are the things that I guess a comfortable middle class within a a Western economy you would expect to see. But I think over the last 10, 15 years, the reality of cost, to buy a home or rent a home is, just astronomical. And especially in the last 5 years, that cost has just exploded for most people, whilst the rate or the percentage rate at which wages are growing isn't keeping up with the cost of living. And we are now, I guess, in this like trapped middle where people earn good money, but that actually is just, or I suppose people earn good money on paper, but
Yeah,
then are stuck, right? Because that doesn't, you might earn more gross, but that doesn't necessarily mean your net take home is that much higher given the incremental rate, the disproportionate rate, the sort of tax trap kicks in. And if you've got kids and all of the other things that you've been told have been expected to achieve by a certain age,
yeah,
people must be stuck. And I say people because yes, existing living is expensive. Sometimes it does feel like I'm just paying to exist, but I also, as an adult, don't have much by way of responsibility. I'm not a parent. There are some issues or some challenges with adult social care, because that's another
yeah,
big trap that a lot of people of my parents' generation, sort of people in their 50s and 60s, are now facing, is that they're trapped with care costs for their children or
and
housing their children later into life, but
yeah,
also then have social care issues for their parents,
yeah,
people who are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then you've kind of got this dual outgoing that the generation before didn't necessarily have to pay for. So as our standard of living has improved, and yes, people's jobs and earnings have improved, but so have our costs, like our outgoing have increased, significantly. And it doesn't feel like there's much by way of help either. People feel disenfranchised with paying into a system that they don't really benefit from.
yeah. The help aspect is, or even support, is something I do think about it, but I don't necessarily go as far as not thinking about or coming up with what would be a solution outside of what we traditionally understand as communities, where it takes, for example, the saying of it takes a village to raise a child. I don't know if that always extends all the way up into the elderly and support and care for the elderly. I don't know if we necessarily, as in British society, do a good enough job of that. And then also, you mentioned subscriptions, and that is the new business model. The ideal is to have a subscription-based product, and oftentimes people are advised that if you are building any type of product or service, the ideal is to have a subscription-based model. Gone really are the days where you create a really great product and someone purchases it once and it stays with them for 30 plus years. I mean, that used to be the standard, and you almost had pride in your product development if you had something that could last a really long time. But nowadays, yeah, I don't know if quality has significantly reduced or if people are just repurposing any idea that they have and saying, okay, let me just try and have recurring revenue from the same customer as opposed to growing the customer base and having a long-term customer in the sense that my product lasts for a very long time. I read something the other day about our household goods. So things like your fridge, your washing machine, microwave, they used to be quite expensive, well, more expensive back in the day, like let's say in the 50s
Mm.
and 60s, but that same fridge would last multiple generations. Whereas today, you'll buy the fridge and maybe get a 5 year guarantee if you're lucky, and then you have to buy another one.
We've gone from like ownership to sort of like essentially borrow, right? We don't, you borrow your music, you borrow your TV, you borrow your films, you don't actually own, no one buys physical things. I suppose people buy clothes still, albeit that model
Fast
again is
fashion.
like cheap, imported. I think there is a rise in sort of a slow fashion quality movement, but that again is largely priced for people that can afford it. Who who
Yeah.
who these people are and what they do, I have no idea.
There are still plenty of them out there. All of what we're saying right now, I can't relate, you know. I think that it's just a point of consumerism. We've always had consumerism. I just think that today the squeeze is a very big squeeze. And I was once talking to one of my family friends who's like 10, 15 years older than me, and she was explaining to me how they used to do house parties because I was having the adulting conversation with her, and she was saying that when she was in her teens and her family would be having house parties, they used to get by on about 50 quid, and that was enough to cater to
Mm.
their guests so they could have up to upwards of 30 people in their house and everyone was fed and they had a great time. Someone would rock up with a DJ desk. People would rock up with crates of beers or wines or whatever else, and it just was easy to do. Whereas today, when they're thinking about having a gathering of even just 5 people over, they're thinking about that expense and they can think back to that time when 50 quid would go so far. And today, I don't know anyone who can have a 50 quid grocery shop, let alone trying to host people at home on that budget.
Yeah, like you've got like your like the food and drink element, but then like
Mm.
the actual cost of hosting people, like the lights on. If it's in the winter, you're going to have heating. If you're going to have like if you're cooking, like the cost of running that stove or an oven or an air fryer, like there are I guess those other costs that your people I guess are a bit more mindful of because
Absolutely.
despite like you're spending more of your income on necessities, therefore your disposable income, your fun money is ever shrinking.
Yeah, yeah,
But I guess that's the fundamental, especially for for most Western economies, we are service based. We require people to spend money in the economy. We're not making things for export. And if you know 60, 70, 80% of your income is going on existing, you're not then spending, you're not spending in your local restaurants or your local bars or even in your local pub. You are basically just funneling money into the rental sector or the finance sector via a mortgage and the energy sector. That's great if you work in those sectors because you're obviously going to be seeing the windfall. But if you're a
mm,
small independent business that relies on people spending regular small amounts of money with you, they're often the first things that get cut.
yeah. When you look at so what's a priority? Yes, as you said, that's where people do start to cut back on things like eating out and even day activities. Someone that I am doing a project with, we were discussing school and how we used to go on school trips to like the local farm or you'd go to a museum, the things that were cheap and
Mm,
sometimes free. And nowadays, if you were to pop down to your local farm, a lot of them are also struggling, and it's because they don't necessarily have as many people going to do
mm,
the weekend trip or the weekday school trips are not happening as often as they used to. And yeah, it's quite sad to me, but it's generally is when you're thinking about your priorities, the things that you can't just turn off or do less of, such as, oh, I'm not at home as much, so I don't need to pay as much rent or mortgage. That's not
yeah,
how it works. I don't use as much gas and electricity. Perhaps, yes, that will change a little bit, but you still have your standing rates. There are things that you just can't get it down to close to zero, for example, right? But
yeah.
I do think I okay, so new financial year, we all get those letters where certain things have gone up in line with the retail price index, and
Hmm.
the same doesn't happen with our salaries. And I know
Yeah.
that a lot of companies are also feeling the pinch, and we could maybe go on a whole tangent around what companies can afford, what can they reduce, what they pay in dividends to shareholders, they can pay staff more, all of that stuff. I mean, we can talk about that at length, but the reality is these companies aren't, many of them are not going to do that. And so we find the cost to live increases and increases, and that happens on an annual basis, even if
Yeah.
I cannot demonstrate that their costs have increased at the same rate that they're increasing their prices, we still would have to
Mm,
now just pay for whatever the new price is that they tell us. Yes, there are certain things that you could go and shop around for, things like internet, things like your phone is a bit annoying, your car insurance also a bit annoying, changing every year and looking for a new deal and whatever, whatever. But these are some of the things that we have to do as part of adulting. That life admin that
mm.
we were talking about, it can get a lot, honestly. And I don't know, maybe I'm just ranting, but it is something that's been fresh on my mind because, as I said, at the top of this is that time of year when I do start looking around and thinking, okay, where can I cut back on things that are not essential? Is this thing the best rate? I just recently changed my phone contract, and that did save me a bit of bob by switching. I must say, this new provider, I won't say any names, but I do sometimes have network issues. But I say to myself, hey, for the next saving, it's something, I could use that for whatever else, just not spend it or whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, the adulting, it costs too much and I kind of want a refund, but I don't know where to get the refund from.
I think it's such it's a really interesting point, and like every business out there, their increases are inflationary plus for protection, right? So whatever, for internet and phone is usually RPI plus 3%. And it used to be a lot higher. But there's this is sort of, I get the business case, right? If I run a business, I need to ensure and protect longevity and prepare, or maybe sort of protect the business against other impacts, the cost of employing people, etc., etc. But there is sort of like a moral argument for loyalty and also just like financial health of customers. Of if you're increasing things every year and your service isn't improving, like it's morally unjustifiable, really. And I know a lot
Yeah.
of them give you this caveat of we're investing for the future, um, yada yada yada. But hey, let's look at Thames Water, for example. It didn't work with them, right? Bills have gone up over the last 30 years since that was privatized. And arguably, if you live in the southeast of England and Thames Water is your only water provider available, you don't have a choice because what you can't live without water. Um, and there is a whole different debate around ownership and management of utilities that people need to access to survive.
Yeah.
Because, again, you as individuals or families or units or whatever you want to describe everyone as, is that there are things that you can and cannot live without. Like you need water, you need energy, you need food. Um, Now, over the last, 5 or 6 years, I don't see many supermarkets struggling because of their lower food and beverage sales. There are supermarkets struggling, but that's usually due to financial mismanagement and terrible deal making.
Other things. Yeah.
But if you want to look at like the big, two or three, if you look at Tesco, Sainsbury's, and then maybe someone like Aldi, who is privately held and not accountable for shareholders, the money that is being made and distributed in profits is way outstrips the cost increase to customers. And I think there is like a moral element of adults, we find it so difficult to exist and pay for things and enjoy, a comfortable quality of life on decent money, largely
What was
because there
decent?
is such an
Yeah.
extraction of wealth through basic services and needs.
Yeah.
And that ultimately people will, happily stand fast and say it's a government problem. And maybe there is an element of regulation, but that again, maybe for a different day. It's not just a tax issue, though. This isn't just about people being taxed too much or inefficiency in the tax system. This is a moral argument around, yes, companies have a duty to make sure they return to shareholders, but ultimately, if you're just ripping off your customers, I just it just it makes adulting 10 times harder,
Yeah.
especially when you've got the likes of, it's this rise of use your supermarket points card to get discounts on items that we could have kept lower, but we're going to put the price up and then
Yes.
give you a discount and say that you've saved money.
Yeah.
Well,
You do God
why
knows
not
what
just,
with that data.
flat rate? So you still know what people are buying, even if they're not using their lovely shiny
Loyalty cards.
points
Yeah.
card.
Yeah.
Um, and I think we both read the article on the family, who are, I think their joint income is about £78,000 a year, which on paper is good money, raising a family with two kids in the house, but are struggling because their rent's gone up, the cost of food has gone up, but their rate of wage or rate of income has not
Hasn't increased.
increased in line with it. And I suppose the other big issue with a lot of people face is the issue with, is with, without getting too into the economic side of it, but fiscal drag for people who are earning more money, but then the tax bands are not increasing or changing with inflation, and therefore people end
Yeah.
up paying more tax and are not seeing a positive net take home
Hmm.
and therefore, why are they bothering to
Taking
earn
on the
more
extra,
money?
potentially extra work as well. I mean,
Yeah,
I know people who have sat down in a negotiation and have not chosen what could have been the top
yeah,
end of the budget for the role because of the fact that they don't see the overall benefit in terms of what they take home. But just on that subject of what would have been a really decent salary or what is understood as a decent salary, the other thing that we're maybe not perhaps going in as much detail in today's episode about is people who are trying to get onto the property ladder. That family that you were
mm,
talking about, they are in their mid-30s and said they had hoped that by now they would have been able to get onto the property ladder. And so they're also trying to save for a mortgage deposit while
yeah,
renting. And there's that in between time that can also create even more of a squeeze because you're trying
yeah,
to do what you've been advised as the financially responsible thing to do is to get onto the property ladder. You're trying to do that. And these days, I just, I don't know. I don't know. Some of the advice that we were given when we were children, or things that were drummed into us as being financially responsible things to do, today, it doesn't necessarily translate as much as it perhaps would have even 5 years ago, I think, or maybe more than 5 years ago. But yeah, the other thing I wonder about, we were talking about care and support for the elderly.
mm,
I read something a couple of years ago, and there's a company that pairs young people with an older person who's got a spare room. And I think we've spoken about things like that
mm,
a lot in it being a solution to, I suppose, two issues. One is young people who live in, let's say, for example, a major city and they want to have a convenient commute to work or to the office. And then you have an older person who has their property, let's say it's got multiple spare bedrooms and their children have now left. They've needed a little bit of help and support, and then together you're essentially
yeah,
meeting each other's needs. And on one hand, I do think that is really great, and it's a really good option for people who both have a particular need that they can. It's a
mm,
symbiotic relationship, right? I also think that it is an example of things not working the way that they really
yeah.
should.
I agree.
And the fact that as a young person, you cannot afford to have a roof over your head,
Mm,
whether it's for you as a single person, you as a partnered person, you as a one member of a family, um, as in the family living together, it's like you're part of that family. Yeah, that society should be working, and I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
yeah,
And it just there are so many things within society that just aren't working, and I don't know who's actually looking at these things. And you brought up the point about morality. No one at the moment is holding any of these companies to account. And I don't think there's
yeah,
anybody who has the power to do something apart from the powers in the people. Yes, we know that. But in terms of the people
yeah,
who hold these positions where they can make changes or at least put forth some changes to generate debate and come up with solutions, they're not incentivized to do so because of two reasons. One that I'll mention now is they do not have a direct impact on these things affecting the everyday person. So they're
mm,
not directly impacted by these things. So they don't really have that incentive to say, okay, this is actually affecting me as well as my local community. So I'm going to do something about this. I don't want to be a pessimist. I know that there are people out there who do have the desire to make
mm,
change and to improve the well-being of society and the members within it. But I just think when it comes to things like as simple as these companies who are increasing prices without transparency, without actual justification or measurable justification, who stops them? And
yeah.
yes, the power is in the consumer just to not purchase, but some of the things we've discussed, we don't have any other option.
I
So
mean, yeah,
what what do you do in that instance?
You're so right. I mean, and it's like that whole the market will regulate itself. I mean, we've seen that that just doesn't work, right? Look at public utilities. Water is the prime example. There is no competition because if you live in particular areas, you can't change. I'm a Thames Water customer. I can't change my provider because there isn't another
Yeah.
provider.
Yes.
Um, you know, we talk. You look at things like utility, like in terms of like internet and phone. Okay, you've got what BT, Virgin Media, O2, and then there are a handful of other providers, but lots of them, when you look at the fine print, are
Yep.
subsidiaries of those companies.
There
So
you
they're
go.
not, and it's the same with the mobile phone network. So you have essentially three companies in the UK that own infrastructure,
Yep.
and everybody else is either a mobile virtual network, um, or just a subsidiary of one of the big three, because
Yeah.
they have conquered a market. So there is like it's I think really great in theory, but actually in practice people are struggling. The market doesn't regulate itself, and there isn't any notion of true competition, and therefore people are just stuck, um, and they are therefore just stuck paying prices. And yeah, you're in terms of accountability, there just isn't. Um, you know, there's no there's no sort of moral standing, um, and therefore we're all paying through the nose for just about everything, I think. But the interesting thing actually you said about like young people living with old people, that is sort of like a thing from like a bygone era or from the past when you look at like post war period where young single people would rent rooms from widowers and widowers who had, you know, a room to rent in a city. But we kind of moved away from that in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s. But now we've kind of, it's a bit of a full circle moment that we're back in. People can't afford it, so they're renting rooms. And also, if you rent a room in London with, you know, if you're in a house share, for example, it's not
Mm.
cheap,
No.
you know,
No.
and you're paying, you know, you're probably what 60-70% of your income on a room, access to a room that has access to a kitchen, and if you might have a communal lounge if you're lucky. Yeah, I do. I must admit, it feels there's little to be optimistic about at the moment in terms of being an adult. I think there are even the fun things that we were probably sold. You know, you have freedom and independence to do what you can, but I think money limits that for a lot of people. And I
Mm.
think at the moment there is a real challenge. But yeah, who do you apply for a refund? I think, you know, becoming an adult is one of the biggest missold scandals of our generation because it's not what it's cracked up to be. Um, but I think yeah, I say that for a lot of people. I speak on their behalf, but I don't really have a right to because a lot of the things that we've spoken about today are not direct. I don't, you know, I don't. They're not directly applicable to me, but I do see these things around me and the challenges that people face and the choices that people have to make. And it's hard.
Yeah. And just quickly, the organization that does the living with somebody else thingamajig is helpful housemate. And yeah, that society should be working, and it just isn't. I do think though, just as we're sitting here talking, I do realize that I'm probably the most emotive I've been in a while, and it's just because I have a whole lot on my head. But I will
Mm.
say that where you can have feeling of control, try and grab that. So I'm also saying that to myself. The things that you can control, try and make those incremental changes. And the things that you can't control, try and change the way you think about it. But we do know that society should be working. It's not adulting is a lot, but we still can't really get a refund day.
I mean, we haven't even touched upon how hard how much harder it is as a single person. Like that
Mm,
maybe is another one for another day. Like life is, the challenges are there. I think in the article that we both read, that's a shared problem for that household. Whereas, if you're on your own, if you're single, it's much harder, and it shouldn't be. But yeah, maybe that's one for another day.
maybe for
Uh,
another day. Maybe for another day.
but keep adulting, uh, and I'll catch you next week.
Catch you next week.